Section B, collecting information.
Most of the writing you'll do in college will require you to collect information of some kind. Now, there's no exact time in the writing process at which you should begin collecting information. The writing of your paper and the researching of your topic go hand in hand, just like peanut butter and chocolate.
Now we got a tip for you.
As you collect information, you don't want to let your research write your paper for you. You want to incorporate the research into your paper. Don't replace your words with the research. That would be bad. You want to figure out what your own ideas are about your topic and the research. Your paper will be good, and you'll get a better grade. So where do you find research? Well, it's everywhere!
But the primary place you'll find research is in your school's library.
The library can be a really intimidating place. If you have any questions, there is almost always someone in the library to help you. They're called librarians, so don't hesitate to ask.
I was overwhelmed by the library. I felt like a tiger in a room full of fine china.
Nathan looked like a little lost puppy.
My first thought was run, Nathan, run like the wind.
I massaged his temples like this.
She was a lifesaver.
It's just a circular movement of the wrist. See? Round and round.
There are lots of tools in the library for researching. And now that computers have stormed the library and taken over, it's absolutely essential that you know the basics of computer research to use the library's tools. Next, we'll look at some things you need to consider as you research.
First, before you begin researching, you should map out what kind of research you're going to look for.
What kind of research you choose depends upon the assignment.
Some assignments require a certain number of sources, sometimes sources from particular places. Other assignments might require you to conduct interviews, surveys, or experiments.
Regardless of the kind of research your assignments expect you to get, you should plan it out ahead of time.
With the increased use of the information superhighway, it's very easy to get lost in a sea of information.
So the first thing we'll do is briefly look at some of the sources open to you.
The primary types of information are print sources, such as books, scholarly journals, newspapers, and mass magazines, like Time and Newsweek. You can also use computer sources, like internet web pages or email groups. A third type is research you conduct yourself, like interviews, observations, or surveys.
Now let's go a little deeper into each of these types of research. You can find print sources in lots of places.
Like the library, the bookstore, or the newsstand.
As we already said, print sources are stuff that's on paper. You may have to look on a computer to get them, but print sources appear in books or magazines first. Now, each college's computer system is set up a little differently. Most have their magazine and journal articles separate from their books. It's really important for you to know your school's computer system.
There is another important thing to remember when you're researching, and that is don't take your source at face value. What do I mean by that? Well, there are lots of questions that you should ask of the source.
Here are some questions to ask of your source. What is the date of the article or book? Is it old news based on old methods of research? Is it up to date and aware of current developments in the field? Or does it still use an abacus?
You also should question the author and whatever evidence he or she uses.
Does the author have an axe to grind or an obvious political agenda? Does the author argue his or her point well? Does he or she use evidence carefully? These types of questions should be asked no matter what field of study you're writing for.
So print sources are one kind of research you can use. Another way to dig up information is with the computer, like web pages or email groups. More and more people are using the internet and email as sources of news, information, and ideas for writing.
If you use a computer source, then you gotta document it. Check a style handbook to find out how to document computer sources. We could spend an entire tape talking about how to use the internet effectively, so we'll just go over a few general things you should think about when using computer sources.
First, computer sources aren't tangible. You can't swat flies with them, and you can't put them on your head and learn to walk properly like you can with a book or magazine. So, it's a good idea to print out any information you're using and write down the address of the source.
You want to ask many of the same questions of computer materials as you do of print sources. Remember, any Joe Schmo can post an email message or create a web page. That means that lots of the information you see on the internet or in email groups is suspect. So be careful.
So you want to think about who the source is. Who do they cite as evidence, and is there enough of it? Basically, you just want to question everything the author says.
Section C, outlining.
Okay, you've got some ideas. You know what you want to write about, but you still have questions. What do you do with all these ideas? What should go first in your paper? What should go last? Who invented the donut hole and why? But most importantly, how do all these things you've been thinking, free writing, and researching about connect?
At this point, it's kind of like having a bunch of puzzle pieces without the box to look at. You've got all these pieces, but you don't know how to make them fit together.
I wish I had a box to look at.
And if you're confused about where your writing is going, then you're not going to be clear about what you want to say.
Unclear.
So what should you do? Well, you need to figure out how you can create an essay that has a direction that makes sense and at the same time is detailed and clear. A typical method used to help you figure out the structure and direction you want your paper to take is outlining. There are two primary methods of outlining available to you.
One type of outline is clustering. Clustering is a visual grouping of ideas on a page. You group your ideas according to how they connect, not by where they appear in your paper.
Clustering is a good way of figuring out how your ideas fit together. So how do you do it?
Well, you start with the question your paper asks, or the topic or main idea of your paper. You write this in a circle in the middle of your paper. Next, like free writing, you brainstorm ideas that connect to this central idea. These ideas are branches of your main idea. You keep branching as you think of things that connect until you run out of ideas. Notice it looks like a giant web when you're done. And just for fun, you can add some spiders to your branching. Uh-oh, a fly's caught in the web. Oh, and here comes a big black widow. Oh, no.
Clustering is effective because it allows your mind the freedom to connect ideas without trying to force your ideas into a confining structure, like an essay or a rigid outline might. Let's go back to Nathan and use his free write as a basis for his clustering.
His preliminary thesis is that he'll describe the different groups that form in high school and argue why those groups form.
He can use this as his central idea in clustering.
Looking at his free write, we can see that he's already started to divide high school into groups. Nathan thinks the popular kids are beautiful and that there are several categories of nerds. He also thinks there's a group in the middle.
So Nathan can use these as bubbles shooting out of his central idea in his cluster. These are the major subcategories of his main idea.
Next, he splits the nerd group into several social groups.
He has those nerds which are socially inept, those that are really into school, and the nerds that are physically unattractive.
Remember, cluster outlines work the best when you let your mind wander. I need to change the oil in my car. Oh, and I forgot to buy milk. When an idea pops into your head, you just connect that thought to whatever idea it follows from.
Since part of his main idea is to figure out why so many groups form in high school, this can be another bubble coming from this central focus.
We'll stop here. You can keep going with your clustering for as long as you have ideas. You can also use clustering throughout the writing process.
Clusters can be used instead of free writing. They can also be used to help you study. You can group the main ideas from your class in preparation for a test. Or, when you're given a question on an essay exam, you can organize all the ideas you have into clusters before writing.
Now let's look at another type of outline.
So are we ever going to start on the rough draft?
Remember, all this pre-writing, like the free writes and outlines, are going to keep you from getting writer's block when you sit down to write your essay.
These pre-writing activities are kind of like the gallon of gas, jumper cables, and spare tire you keep in your car. If you start to stall in your writing, you can refer back to your pre-writing to get you on the road again to finishing your piece of writing.
Now we're going to look at a linear outline. Most of you have probably used this type of outline. You connect ideas and examples by where you think they will appear in your paper. Let's go back to Nathan and see what a linear outline of his paper would look like at this time.
His preliminary thesis is at the top. Remember, this was the central idea placed in the middle bubble of his cluster. Now we'll show you how to break one of these social groups into a linear outline. Let's outline the popular kids.
Remember, there are several groups of popular kids: the attractive group, the athletic ones, and the smart Alex.
These social groups will represent by hyphens. These are subcategories of the larger group, the popular kids.
Nathan can go into even further detail for each of these groups.
These descriptions are indicated by bullets and are slightly indented from the group of popular kids.
Nathan would do this for every high school group. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to each outline method. You should use whichever one works best for you.
As we said earlier, clustering allows you to roam freely with your thoughts. You're not constrained by the direction your thoughts take you in. However, this can be a disadvantage at times. Some writers would rather use a linear outline since it gives them a more concrete structure from which they can write. They know where to begin and where they'll end. For other writers, a tight structure can be a disadvantage. Using a linear outline will constrain their thought process and force them to insert ideas where they don't belong.
Now, no matter what method you use, these outlines are only intended to give you a direction as you begin writing your first rough draft. As you write, you'll probably find that your outline will need to change.
So let's look at where we are in the writing process. We've done a couple of free writes and decided what our topic is going to be and how we can fit it into the demands of the assignment. We've also looked at what kind of research we're going to need for the assignment. We've just finished creating a preliminary outline that has organized our thoughts and given us a direction when we begin writing a rough draft. And that's what we're going to do in the next section.